Working the late shift at the local grocery store had become routine for me. It was a quiet night, and the rain had been pouring steadily since dusk, making the store feel even more isolated. Usually I'd have a few other workers around, but tonight I was alone. I was stocking the shelves in the snack aisle when I heard something fall on the other side of the store. The automatic doors hadn't made a sound, so I wasn't expecting anyone to be there. When I glanced over, I noticed a woman in her late 30s standing at the end of the aisle, her soaked hair clinging to her face as she stared blankly at me. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't respond right away, but eventually asked in a low voice,
Where can I find the batteries?
There was something unsettling about her. Her eyes seemed off, like she was looking through me rather than at me. I pointed towards the back of the store and quickly returned to my work, hoping she would leave soon. As I was moving the cart toward the back room to grab more stock, she suddenly appeared in front of me, blocking my path. She started asking me odd questions, what my name was, how old I was, and if I lived nearby. The conversation grew stranger when she asked if I lived alone and if I ever got scared working nights by myself. Her tone made me uncomfortable, and I tried to politely end the conversation. She put her hand on my arm and leaned in, asking if I ever felt like someone was watching me. I pulled away, mumbling that I needed to get back to work, and headed straight for the back room. Once there, I decided to wait by the front counter until she was gone. But after waiting for what felt like forever, she never came back up front. I assumed she had left and went to use the bathroom before finishing my shift. While I was in the bathroom, I heard the door creak open. And my heart raced. I stayed completely still, trying not to make a sound. The room was dead silent except for the dripping water from the faucet. I finally dared to glance up and saw her eye peering through the crack in the stall door. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled for the small box cutter in my pocket. I slid the blade through the gap, forcing her to move back, and then I kicked the stall door open, hitting her with it before running out as fast as I could. I bolted out of the store and called my manager repeatedly until he answered. I told him everything, and he told me to call the police. By the time they arrived, she was gone. That night left a mark on me, and after that, I never worked the night shift. I used to work as a night shift security guard at a small, quiet motel in a secluded area. It was the kind of place where travelers stopped for a night before continuing their journey. One late fall evening, a cold wind was howling outside, making the empty parking lot seem even more desolate. The motel had seen better days, and business was slow, with only a few rooms occupied. My shift started at 6 p.m. and lasted until 2 a.m., when another guard would take over. That night, the wind seemed to make everything feel eerier than usual. I sat in the tiny office at the front desk, glancing at the surveillance monitors every few minutes. The motel was nearly empty, and I hadn't seen anyone for hours. I was about to get up and make myself another cup of coffee when I heard the sound of footsteps outside. They were faint at first, but then they grew louder as they approached the entrance. I quickly turned my attention to the front door and saw a man walk in. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a heavy coat that looked too big for him. He walked up to the desk, and without saying anything, he just stared at me. I asked if he needed help, and after a moment he grunted something about needing extra blankets. I handed him a couple of blankets, and he snatched them from me, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something off about him, something that made me uneasy. He turned and walked away without saying another word. I watched him on the monitors as he walked down the hallway, stopping occasionally to look around as if he was lost or looking for something. A little while later, I heard footsteps again, this time faster and more deliberate. The man was back at the desk, his face inches from the glass separating us. He slammed his fist on the counter and demanded to be let into a room. He mentioned a room number that didn't exist. I calmly told him that he must be mistaken, but he just stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then, with a twisted smile, he whispered, "I'm going to kill you." I reached for the phone to call the police, but he started laughing, a low, unsettling sound that echoed in the empty lobby. He kept saying those words over and over, louder each time, until he was practically shouting. I finally managed to dial 911, and as I spoke to the dispatcher, the man slowly backed away, still laughing. He walked out of the motel and disappeared into the night. When my shift ended, I was relieved to leave the motel, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. I walked quickly through the cold, empty streets, the wind biting at my face. As I neared my house, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was. The same man from the motel, his crazed smile plastered on his face. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I sprinted toward the nearest house, hoping someone would help me. I banged on the door, and just as the man reached me, the door swung open and the homeowner yelled out, scaring him off. The police arrived shortly after, and I told them everything. They searched the area but couldn't find him. Days later, I was called to identify him in a lineup, but none of the men looked like him. To this day, I wonder if I made a mistake or if he's still out there watching and waiting. I've been working at a quiet little inn for just over 2 years now. It's a small place tucked away in the hills, and the pay isn't great, but it's a job. A friend of mine, Chris, got me in, and I started with some basic training during the daytime, with Chris covering the night shift with me for a couple of days. Our shift was from midnight until 8 a.m., and most nights were uneventful. I was just checking in guests, doing some paperwork, and keeping an eye on the cameras. It was around autumn, and the nights were getting colder. The first night I was alone, I felt a bit nervous, but everything seemed normal until about 2 a.m. when a man walked in, asking for a room. He looked pretty normal at first, so I didn't hesitate to say we had one available. As I was preparing the paperwork, I noticed he was acting strangely, swatting at the air and muttering under his breath like something was bothering him. I brushed it off and handed him the key, hoping to get back to my work quickly. Not long after, I heard a loud bang on the front door. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked up to see the same man standing there, his face twisted with anger. He shouted that he couldn't get into his room and demanded to know why. Trying to keep calm, I offered him another key, but his expression made my skin crawl. He grabbed the new key and stomped off back to his room. I tried to reach out to Chris for advice, but it was late and he didn't answer. My unease grew when I saw the man coming back down the stairs, looking even more agitated. Fear kicked in and I quickly locked myself in the back office, clutching a small knife I kept for protection. I could hear him banging around in the lobby, yelling something about why I wouldn't let him into his room. My mind was racing, but instead of calling the police, I made the foolish decision to try and handle it myself. After a few minutes, I stepped out, hoping he had left, but I saw him coming out of the restroom. His muttering had turned into something more sinister. He was talking about hurting someone. I forced a smile and told him I would walk him to his room. As we walked, I made sure to stay in front of him, keeping my grip tight on the knife hidden in my sleeve. When we got to the rooms, he stopped at the wrong door, trying to get in. I pointed out his actual room, and he finally went inside. As soon as he did, I ran back to the office and locked the door. Later, I realized he had been trying to get into the room of a lone woman, staying just a few doors down. The next night, I made sure the doors were locked and told him we had no rooms available when he returned. I eventually confided in a police officer who was staying at the inn, and he promised to keep an eye out. When I told my boss what happened, he didn't seem too concerned, but I knew I had narrowly avoided something terrible. That experience was one of the scariest I've had on the job, and it taught me to trust my instincts and not to hesitate to call for help. I've been working as a cashier at a large home improvement store for a while now, usually taking the closing shifts. My co-worker is a quiet, thoughtful guy named Mike. He's a nice guy, but often keeps to himself. Despite his reserved nature, a lot of female customers seem to be drawn to him. They often flirt with him or try to get his attention, but he usually just politely brushes them off. One night, we were working together, and he told me about a woman who had been making him feel uncomfortable earlier that day. She had asked him out, but he gently declined, saying he was already seeing someone. She didn't take the hint and left with a sour expression. Later that evening, after it had started to rain, a customer came back into the store. Mike had stepped out to grab some supplies, so I was alone when the woman approached me. She seemed a bit off. Her eyes were intense, and she didn't look away when I tried to meet her gaze. She asked if Mike was around, and I said he was busy, but she could wait if she wanted. She frowned and insisted that she needed to talk to him right away because she had unfinished business. I started to feel uneasy and told her he wasn't available, but she wouldn't leave. She claimed that Mike had agreed to meet her after work, which didn't sound right to me at all. When Mike returned, I could tell from his expression that he recognized her, and he wasn't happy about it. She immediately went up to him, demanding to know why he had stood her up. Mike, looking uncomfortable, tried to tell her again that he wasn't interested, but she became more aggressive, raising her voice and accusing him of leading her on. Mike stayed calm and asked her to leave, but she refused. The whole situation was getting out of hand, so I decided to step in. I told her that Mike was actually my boyfriend and that we had plans together after work. She didn't believe me and started to get angry, accusing me of lying. Mike backed me up, saying that we were indeed together, hoping it would make her leave. Instead, she became even more upset and started shouting, claiming that she'd make sure neither of us would be together if she couldn't have him. The rain outside had turned into a storm, with loud thunder and flashes of lightning, making the whole thing even more tense. The woman suddenly grabbed a nearby tool and tried to come at us, but Mike quickly stepped in front of me, blocking her path. I yelled for help, and thankfully the security guard rushed in and restrained her before she could do any real harm. The police were called, and she was taken away. After that night, both Mike and I decided it wasn't safe to continue working there. We're still friends, and now go to the same college, but we've taken different jobs. We're both thankful that nothing worse happened, but the incident left us shaken, realizing how dangerous some situations can get when someone doesn't want to take no for an answer.